It's good to be here. Thank you guys so much for supporting us with the coffee, and I'm pretty excited to share about it. And David said in Psalms 1 and 22, he said, I was so glad when they said to me, let's go to the house of the Lord. Isn't that awesome? And I think that's the same thing that we need to say today. You know, it is just good to be here as Christians and worshiping God together. So I want you to look at your neighbor and tell them, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're here. And hopefully you said that honestly. So we'll go from there. I don't know you guys, so I can say that. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to listen to yourself breathing. Okay, you got to shut your eyes and just listen to your lungs take in air and expel air. And you can almost hear your heart start to beat. It's going thump, thump, thump. And what is really amazing about that is you are breathing and your heart is beating, and you are really doing nothing about that. Do you know that? It is just doing that. God has your heart beating. It has your lungs pumping in oxygen in and out. And there is nothing that you do that sits there and says, you know what, I'm hoping I'm going to keep, my heart keeps beating, or I hope my lungs keep working. And you can open your eyes now. And this last week, I've been thinking a lot about how short life is. And just kind of the Ecclesiastes talks about life, and it says it's like this vapor that's here today and gone tomorrow. And I was emailing my accountant this last week. And I was emailing him back and forth, and actually they were kind of one-sided emails. And I noticed he wasn't responding. And on Thursday night, I got a phone call from his son, Josh. And Josh was kind of broken on the phone, and he was crying. And he said, Joe, my dad passed away on Monday. He died. And it made me think, it just like how I was, about 2 weeks before that, we were going back and forth, we were doing some business together, and he was doing some numbers for me, and all of a sudden, the emails stopped coming. And it reminded me of how short life is, how this little span that we have down here on this earth, how quickly it can be over. And there's two things in life that you can't control, but they're going to happen to us all. And one, you're going to die. One, you were born, and one, you're going to die. And Hebrews 9:27 is appointed for man once to die and then judgment. And it's pretty straightforward. And no one asked me, hey, Joe, would you be born? On June 10th, 1980, in a little town up in Western Canada, nobody asked my opinion if I was supposed to come into the world. I just was born. And it happened, and I'm here. And with that comes a lot of things, questions that start to happen in your life. You start to ask questions like, well, why am I here? What is my purpose? Why does God want me on this planet? What's happening here? And we start to ask those questions. And I've lost one person in my life who was really close to me. It was my grandma. She was this sweet little old lady. She spoke German, and she'd always read in German to me, and I wouldn't understand anything. But she said, oh, you have to read it in German because it makes so much more sense in German. And moving here to this culture, to Holmes County, a lot of you probably speak Dutch. My wife does. And sometimes they'll say, you know what, I can say it in Dutch and it just sounds better, and it makes more sense in Dutch. And so I think with German, that was the way my grandma was. And she would always tell me, she's like, Joe, one day you're going to be a preacher. And I laughed because if you knew me in my teenage years, I was not preacher material. That just wasn't going to be happening. But I kind of kept that out. And my grandma, she was a sweet old lady, and my grandma taught me how to drive. So if you're a new driver or somebody that's driving, probably, I don't know if your grandma ever taught you to drive, but my grandma taught me how to drive, and I'm going to tell you how she did. Up in Canada, at 14 was where you could get your driver's permit. And so it's kind of young. And my grandma would, my mom was working in a bank, and my dad was a farmer, so I'd go over to Grandma's house, and I'd say, hey, Grandma, can we go driving? She'd go, yeah, sure. So she'd get in the passenger seat, and she'd start knitting, and I'd drive. And so that's how Grandma taught me how to drive. And she would every once in a while look up and say, man, it seems like we're driving fast. And we were. And she just kept knitting, and she's just the sweetest thing. What was really funny is she had a Ford F-150 Lightning. Remember that truck, back in the 90s, they had those Lightnings? They were kind of a modified, souped-up pickup truck. I think she went in for a Buick and they upsold her. So that's what I'm thinking would happen. I don't know, because my grandma had this thing. But anyway, my grandma got stomach cancer, and she passed away, and it was a really horrible way to die. She literally starved to death, is how she passed away. And I actually came back from a mission trip, and I flew home, and my mom called me when I landed in Cleveland, and she said, Grandma's probably not going to make it much longer. Can you fly back up to Canada? So I basically landed and took off back up to Canada, and I didn't make it home. She had passed away before then. But as she lay there dying, she had, my grandma had some regrets. She had some regrets. I remember I was talking with my mom, and she said she was explaining all the things she wished she would have done in her life. She was explaining all the things that, man, she wished she'd have stepped out and maybe did some other things. And she was going through these regrets. And I'm going to do a PowerPoint here too. I kind of set this up as, I haven't done a PowerPoint. Usually it's a talk I usually give without the PowerPoint. So I'm going to try to get along here. First of all, this is my family. For those of you who don't know who we are, it's my wife, Heather, my daughter, Hannah, then Matt, and Elijah, and Zach. And 2 of them are here today. But so we talked about this. It was appointed for man once to die and then judgment. And one thing we don't want to do is when we get to the end of our life, we don't want to have any regrets. This is a kind of an example here of somebody who got a tattoo and probably didn't use spell check first. And so they're going to have some regrets in their life. And that's something that we don't want to have. And I hear it more and more. There's people that are in nursing homes. There's older people that I talk to that said, you know what, I have regrets. I wish I would have done more with my life. Did my life have purpose? What are people going to say about me when I'm gone? And who will remember me and why? And as Christians, we want to know that God has a plan for our life because he does. And there's this quote by Andy Stanley that says, everyone ends up somewhere, but few people end up somewhere on purpose. So everyone ends up somewhere, but few people end up somewhere on purpose. And part of that is because they have not figured out what their purpose is in life. And so I was talking with a friend of mine. He sells dogs, and he was selling this puppy to a guy up in Michigan. And they agreed upon an address. They agreed upon a price and an address of where they were going to meet. And he gave him his address and said, it's going to take about 4 hours to get to my place here in Holmes County. So this couple, they started out from Michigan. They started driving, and he was waiting 4 hours, came and went. It was about 5 hours, and he's wondering, where are these people at? He's like, they're not showing up. So he called them. They said, well, we're in Erie, Pennsylvania. He's like, yeah, that's not the right place. It's far east. And here they had put the address into their GPS, and they forgot to hit start. And so they were following this little blue arrow just wherever it was going to take them. Now, I don't know how that's possible because, you think, there's no ETA, there's no, you know how GPS work. And from my understanding, they don't use GPS a whole lot. But isn't that kind of the same with a lot of people? They punch in the address, but then they don't really hit go. They don't hit start, and they're just kind of following this little blue check mark. And wherever it takes them, it takes them. Wherever they're going, they're going. My point is that without clear direction or purpose, you're probably going to just drive aimlessly. And God does have a purpose for each one, every one of us. He's actually devised us, or he made us with a plan in mind. In fact, he cares so much about you that he actually knew about you before you were born. So if you have your Bibles, I want you to turn to Psalms 139, or if you have your phones, you can get in your Bible app and you can go to that. Psalms 139. And this whole chapter is about David looking at God and said, you know what, God, I just want you to look into my life. It starts out, search me, know me. You know about what I'm thinking before I even think it. You know my words before I even say them. But I'm going to jump in verse 13 is where I want to start. And I think I actually have it here. It says, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and in your books are written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. This is pretty amazing here. God actually knew you before you were born, before your parents were married, or before you were even thought of. God actually knew you. The creator of the universe, the person that spoke everything into existence, knew you and came up with a plan for you. He has a purpose for you. In fact, in Jeremiah 1:5, God talks about the prophet, and he says, I thought this is a crazy verse here if you think about it. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you, I appointed you a prophet for the nations. Jeremiah came out as a prophet. You know, sometimes we talk about, that guy's a really good ball player, must have came out playing ball. Some of these, there's people that this Jeremiah came out as a prophet. God was like, I wanted you to be a prophet. This is what my plan was for you. And God has a purpose that's specifically for you. Anybody believe here that God has a sense of humor? Think God has a sense of humor? He kind of chuckles, laughs sometimes. He enjoys life. I think he does. Look around here. Come on. God does have a sense of humor. He made us. And he made us with all our weird, strange ideas and habits and all the dumb stuff that we do, and God still is like, I love you guys. And I made you, and I created you, and I have a plan and a purpose for you. So I'm going to kind of go through a couple people in the Bible, because I think it's so, sometimes, when you read these Bible stories, you're like, man, those guys were so much bigger and better than we are. I just can't really relate to them. It just doesn't make sense. I'm reading these stories of, David and Moses and Gideon and all these guys, and they were just so cool, and they could do all this crazy stuff, and they're just not relatable to me. Who am I? And I kind of want to just run through a little bit. Like first guy I'm going to run through is David. We look at David, and typically we think this guy is a man after God's own heart. And when he got selected to be king, he almost got looked over. Remember, Samuel was out, and he was like going to the house of Jesse, and he's going through all the sons. There were 7 sons, and it's like, nope, not this one, nope, not that one. And finally, Samuel's asking Jesse, he's like, is there any other kid left? You got anybody else? He's like, oh yeah, there's the youngest guy, he's out watching sheep. Probably not him. Because in Jewish culture, the oldest son was the one that kind of took the mantle on. He was the one that had the birthright blessing. He was the one that had the purpose and plan in his life, not the youngest. But you know what? God does things opposite. He a lot of times flips the script. He does things that we don't think. So he took a common shepherd. He used him to defeat a giant. And this is a side note here. Oftentimes when we have these, we hear the story of David and Goliath, we always think that David was disadvantaged, right? Like most of the time we're looking at that, the picture there, like David's this little guy and Goliath is so big and huge. I'm going to kind of blow your minds here a little bit, because I think David walked into this fight with the advantage. I think Goliath was just hosed. There is nothing. Picture this. Goliath brought a knife to a gunfight in modern terminology. A sling is a ranged weapon. A sword is you can only as far as you can reach, right? So he's swinging. This guy, they said that back then those guys could throw a sling or throw a stone the equivalent of a .45 caliber pistol. So if you're going to put me up against someone, I'm going to bring the gun, right? I don't want a sword. David had the advantage because God was with him, for one. That was definitely, he had some accuracy things there. But I think God was with him also because he used unconventional type of warfare. Most of us would have walked in there. In fact, Saul said, you know what, you got to dress up with my armor. You got to dress up with my sword. That's not how David was thinking. That's not how God was thinking. He's like, you know what, I'm going to use the tools that God gave me because he has a plan for me. And he used a sling. So God used David to rescue his people from the Philistines. Then you had Moses, another interesting character. He was rescued from being killed at a young age in the Nile. He was adopted by the queen of Egypt. If you're thinking Moses is this really righteous, pious dude, he was actually a murderer. He killed someone. He watched 2 guys fighting, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to step in here, and I'm going to fix the problem, and he ended up killing a guy. A lot of times we don't really bring that story up in our Bible stories. God called him from this burning bush, and he made all kinds of excuses. He said, you know what, I really am bad at public speaking. I'm bad at talking. You don't want to use me. He said, you know what, I don't really have good leadership ability. He said, I'm not good. Who am I to lead all these people out of Egypt? He had a bit of a temper problem. He got angry easily. When you remember, he was supposed to talk to the rock and he beat on it. So he had some anger issues. But God used him to lead 1.5 million people for 40 years through a desert. God accomplished his purpose because he had a plan for Moses. The other guy is a man named Gideon. He's a guy that we kind of remember for storming this, 500,000 troops with about 300 guys. And Gideon, once again, was when God found him, he was actually hiding. I would say he was maybe a little bit of a coward. He was hiding, trying to, I think he was processing some wheat. And the angel comes to him and said, Gideon, you mighty man of valor. I think God has humor, right? Because the guy's hiding, trying to avoid the enemy. And God shows up in the form of an angel and says, Gideon, you mighty man of valor. He's probably thinking, yeah, it's different Gideon. There's probably some other Gideon with another last name that you mixed up. But he didn't believe God at first. He put God through all these tests. He said, well, if you really want it, I'm going to lay this fleece out. I'm going to do all these different things. And God proved once again over and over that he had a plan for Gideon. And he started out with this army of 33,000, whittled it down to 300. And God used Gideon to get the glory. To get the glory because he didn't want Gideon to say, you know what, it was all about me. It was because I was so good, I had all these men, and God eventually did that. So God uses everyday people like you and I to accomplish his goals. And God's plans are so much bigger than we can imagine. We kind of sit here thinking with our little minds, different things that God's doing, and God's plans are like just monstrous. God has a history of using unlikely people to do great things. One of my favorite verses is in Proverbs 16:9. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes steps. So I'm going to tell you the story of how Better Life Coffee started. And I want to preface this. I'm going to give you a disclaimer. I'm an ordinary person. My name's Joe, and there's Joe Blow, Ordinary Joe. It just fits, right? I'm not anything special. And I was kind of living life. I was living the American dream. My whole goal in life, I was 30 years old. I was going to have a nice house, a nice car, a dog, some kids. And that was kind of what my life consisted of. I was working hard, trying to accomplish some of these goals that I had in mind. And I had a friend of mine who had some land donated to him down in Nicaragua. And what he was doing is he wanted to, on the contingency that if he'd get this land, he was supposed to build a community center for kids. And it was kind of a cool, he was telling me about it, and I was like, yeah, it sounds good. And this was in January of 2010. And January in 2010 in Ohio is pretty nasty. Weather's cold, it's snowy, it's just miserable. And so he said, how about you come with me on a mission trip? And so for no other reason but to go serve God, I jumped on this plane. It was 90 degrees in Nicaragua and sunny, and there was a beach. And I jumped on this plane, and I was like, you know what? We're going on this mission trip. I'm going to go serve God. This is what I want to do. God uses people sometimes when they have ulterior motives. Did you know that? Sometimes when we think we're going to do something on our own, or we think we're going to hey, we're going to go on this mission trip because our friends are, because we want to do something. It's fun. The weather's warm. God doesn't really care. He's trying to get you somewhere. And maybe he uses unconventional tactics to do that. So we landed in Nicaragua. And if you don't know much about the country of Nicaragua, it's located right between Honduras and Costa Rica. And at one point, Nicaragua was called the breadbasket of Central America. It was one of the most wealthiest countries. They had incredible imports. They had incredible natural resources that they sent all over the world. Very wealthy country. And then there was, through a whole bunch of things, there was civil war, there was a massive hurricane that hit it, they have active volcanoes that are spewing out, there was earthquakes, it was just crazy. And then there was this giant civil war that happened that basically took Nicaragua and just about wiped out the economy. Right next to Haiti, it's about one of the poorest in Central America right now. I think Haiti's the poorest and Nicaragua is number 2. And so we fly down there, and Olher is my friend that I was with. He was like, let's go look at this land. We went and looked at this land. And this land was donated to us by a child soldier. Back during the Revolution War, there was a child soldier. He was about 14 years old. His name was Cesar Augusta. And he was kind of hired by these Sandinista rebels to go in and basically assassinate these kind of known soldiers. And he was a 14-year-old kid, and he would sneak in at night, and his specialty was a knife, and he would slit people's throats. And he talked to us, and through a translator, he was like, you know what, I made a lot of kids orphaned when I was like going, in my early teens, or late teens and early 20s. And he said, I want to do something to give back. I want to help kids who are struggling. I want to help kids who don't have fathers, who don't have dads. And I want to give back to them. So that's why he was donating this land. And so we started talking about the land. And while I was down there, I actually met, this was actually the property right here. It's kind of a bad picture, but the property was a little overgrown, but it was about 5 acres. And so we started the process of building a school on here. And while I was down there, we were driving along, and we picked up this hitchhiker, just kind of totally random. This guy's hitchhiking along the road in Nicaragua, and I'm sitting on the back of this truck, and we pick up this guy named Ben Sullivan. And he's explaining to me that, he moved down here when he was about 20 years old. He's a translator, what he's doing. He was giving me all this stuff, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I was like, where did you come from? And he goes, well, I was from Washington. Well, if you know geography, Washington and Alberta, Canada are relatively close, a lot closer than Ohio. And he used to come up, and when he was a kid, he used to come up to my dad's church. And I was like, how ironic is this? I'm meeting this guy down in Nicaragua that on the back of a pickup truck, and he was a hitchhiker. And he started telling me about how he's helping some farmers with coffee, and he's like, would you ever want to go to a coffee farm? Well, I actually didn't even really drink coffee. My preferred drink of choice in the morning was Coke. I know, it's terrible for you, but I would drink Coke. I mean, you can ask my wife, she'd buy it by the case. I drank a lot of Coke. I've switched to coffee now. But I didn't actually even drink coffee. So he's like, you know what, do you want to go to a coffee farm? And I was like, yeah, let's go to a coffee farm. So we went to this coffee farm, and he was telling me a story about this coffee farmer. And this coffee farmer was talking to me, and Ben was translating. And he was telling me how he grows the coffee and all that. And I was like, this is a really interesting story. He said, I say, like, what are you, do you have any issues? Like, what are some problems that you face down here as a coffee farmer? And he goes, well, last year I had a problem. He goes, I borrowed some money from a loan shark. Basically, they can't go to a bank and borrow money down there. They have to actually get it from someone who is kind of an under-the-table money lender. And they charge about 20 to 30% interest. And so he borrowed $5,000 from this guy because he needed money for fertilizer, for herbicides, for his crops, for his coffee farm. Well, he had a bad coffee harvest and couldn't pay the guy back. So he showed up, and he wants to collect his money, and the farmer's like, you know what? I don't have the $5,000. I can't help you. And this is where the story gets a little crazy, and I asked him to repeat it a couple times. The loan shark said, well, what do you have? What do you have that you can give in payment for this loan that you owe me? And he said, I have my 12-year-old daughter. And so this farmer paid off his loan with his daughter. And he never seen her again. And I, at the time, had a 5-year-old daughter. And I heard that story, and I was like, there's something wrong here. I mean, there's got to be something I can do. And I came back from the trip, and you know how you come back from a mission trip and you kind of start to forget a little bit of everything that you were doing on the trip. And I kind of forgot about this, honestly. I mean, every once in a while I'd think about it. I was like, oh, I wonder how that farmer's doing. I wonder, if he ever found his daughter again. But I kind of forgot about it. And we were, kind of getting back into the swing of things of, the American dream. Remember, that's kind of what we're doing here in Holmes County and Wayne County. We're living the American dream. And my wife and I were looking to purchase this house. And we had a down payment. We're starting to work on this down payment. And we got this tax refund. It was about March, tax refund time. And about that time, I get this email from Ben, the translator. He said, hey, remember that farmer that you said you would want to help somehow? And I was like, yeah, I kind of remember him. He goes, he has this pallet of coffee. It's about 2,000 pounds of coffee. He would love to sell it to you. I was like, oh, great. I'm sure he does love to sell it to me. I said, okay, kind of how much is this pallet of coffee? He said, well, I think he can get it up here and shipped up here for about $3,500. I was like, oh, okay, that's a little bit of money, but yeah, maybe that might work. We got a tax refund in the mail for $3,000. I've never got that much as a tax refund before. I never got it since. And we're sitting here, and my wife and I were talking about this, and we're like, okay, well, that's a little strange. I mean, it's almost the exact same amount of money that we could use to buy this coffee. The flip side is I needed about $3,000 more to have enough to pay for a down payment on my house. And so I had this tremendous struggle. What do I do with this money? Do I send the money down to Nicaragua, not really sure where it's going or who it's going to exactly, or do I do the Dave Ramsey thing, which would make sense, right? Financial peace and investing and making sure my money is stretched. Or do I send this money down to Nicaragua? Well, it ended up we did. We wired Western Union it down. And we got a pallet of coffee come up. Actually, it was 2 pallets of coffee. They sent it up to Delta Freight. And just a little, this is, if you don't know much about coffee, coffee is actually as a plant. It's like a small bush. It's red. It's a red fruit. So if you can say coffee is really healthy because it's a fruit, you're supposed to eat your fruits and vegetables. So go for it. This is part of the process. They wash it, and they water wash it. And then there's also a lot of hand sorting that goes into it. And this little guy, he's sitting there, and all the coffee's hand sorted. They don't have a lot of machines to do this. So everything's done very hands-on. And so I jumped in my minivan, and I headed up to Cleveland because I have some coffee to pick up. And I think the gross weight on a minivan is about 800 pounds is what you're supposed to put in there. It's not supposed to put a ton of coffee in. Now, I never took a picture of my, I didn't take a picture of my minivan. I should have in hindsight, but this is what it felt like. In fact, I remember I crossed some train tracks and I scraped on the back. So I have a ton of coffee in the back of my van. I laid all the seats down and we just stacked this thing full. And I get home and, we're unloading this coffee in the garage and I'm like, what am I doing with this coffee? For one thing, I was naive enough and probably dumb enough that I thought they were going to roast it for me down there. This coffee was all green. It was like straight up just green coffee in these big 152-pound sacks. And we're unloading it, and we're like, what are we going to do with this? And 10 years ago, 11 years, coffee wasn't quite as trendy as it is today. Right now, it's like, there's a roastery and there's a coffee shop in every corner. But I started calling people. I'm like, hey, I called this guy I never met before. His name was Wayne Weaver. I'm like, hey, Wayne, I have coffee, and I'm trying to start a competing business with you. And would you roast it for me? Because I don't have a roaster. I don't even know what I'm doing. And he was like, well, we should talk. And I was like, yeah, it's probably a good idea. So we sat down and talked. I kind of explained my vision. I said, I'm trying to help this farmer. I got this coffee here. And he was all over it. The dude was like, let's do this. He said, I'll roast your coffee for you, and you can do with it what you want after that. And so we started roasting coffee. And I remember one night, I'm like, I got to have a name for it. I can't just call it coffee. And I remember waking up one night about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had this name, Better Life Coffee, in my head. And it was like, we enjoy a really good life here, right? We can all admit that. How can we give someone else a better life? And that's kind of the name stuck. And so, of course, what do you do? The first thing when you come up with the name brand, you Google it. So I Googled it. There's a guy in Canada that owned it. He owned Better Life Brands. And under Better Life Brands, he had Better Life Tea, Better Life Coffee, Better Life Chocolate, Better Life. The list went on and on. So I was like, well, I'm going to call him up. I'm going to give him the spin that, hey, I'm trying to help these farmers. Let's work a deal. He said, yeah, I got a deal for you, $10,000. You can have the name. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? I said, I just barely paid for this coffee with $3,000. Where am I going to get the 10 grand for? But I did notice that he hadn't renewed the name in a while. So you're actually supposed to, as a trademark and even as a online entity, you're supposed to renew it. And it was coming due in about 3 months. So I put it in my calendar and I waited, and the day came by and he didn't renew it. So I got it for $19.99 on GoDaddy. So I own Better Life Coffee. And so it was just crazy. You know, stuff like that just is crazy. So I want to come back to that house that I was going to buy. I was watching the Browns game. It was a Sunday in the fall. And I get a text from my real estate agent. She said, you know that house that you were looking to buy? And I was like, yeah. She goes, you still interested? And I said, yeah, but I don't have the money for it. She goes, well, the guy had a stroke and passed away. I was like, oh, that's not good. Well, she said his daughter came up from Florida and said, make an offer on the house. Whatever you want to just make an offer on it. So I was like, well, if I'm looking at my down payment that I have like $4,000, $28,000. And she laughed at me. And then she sent me a text back, said, you just bought a house for $28,000. Is that not crazy? God didn't want me to have that house, and he didn't want me to pay full price, a half a year ago. He wanted to get me this house for $28,000. Just a crazy thing. Stuff that you can't make up. Stuff that I can't even begin to have a reasonable explanation for. Now, I know this was back, in 2011. It was the price of houses have definitely went up. But when God wants you to have something, he's going to get it for you. Because he's that kind of God. We sang about that. He's a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper. God actually does that. And as when I got involved with coffee and I had this whole crazy story that started happening, is where my faith really started to okay, God actually does the things that he said in the Bible. He started doing this stuff because I'm experiencing it. I have no other good explanation for it. Trust me, it's not because I'm smart, because I'm not. And it's not because I have a great game plan, because I ordered coffee that I thought was going to come roasted. And I just assumed that it would sell itself. God does stuff that is so much bigger and better than we're thinking of. So that first, we started out with 2,000 pounds of coffee. And in 2019, we actually ordered 80,000 pounds of coffee, which is 2 shipping containers full. Is that not crazy? Is that not incredible? That's a lot of coffee. Now, with that being, I'm going to tell you a little story about 2019. So I usually order a container of coffee. At that point, we're selling about a container worth of coffee a year, about 42,000 pounds. And the farmers that I buy from, they had some friends that actually had some coffee as well, and they had got a shipping container together, and some guy left them sitting, put a down payment on it, and then said, you know what, I don't want this container. So they contacted me and said, Joe, do you want 2 containers of coffee? Which is about $75,000 to $80,000 worth. And I said, well, I don't have any money for that. That's a lot of money. And then I was thinking back, God did this, refund $3,000. I was like, that would be a sweet refund if I would get that, hopefully, That means I didn't do taxes right, apparently. I decided, I'm going to throw it up on Facebook and say, look, this is what I have. I got this shipping container. I need some money. I didn't quite put the full amount on. I think I put $40,000 on. And then I went around and just started asking some people. Within 48 hours, I had raised $80,000. Just people were just like, Joe, hey, we heard about this coffee. Let's do it. And paid for the second shipping container of coffee. Now, what happened in 2022 or 2020? We all know, global pandemic. Do you think you can ship coffee from Nicaragua during that time? Nope. Couldn't. They shut down all the ports. Everything was shut down. I had no clue when I bought that container in 2019 that I'm going to need 2 containers of coffee. No idea. Not a clue. But God did. He sees in the future. He sees in the past. He sees all over. And I thought about that. I really came probably this close to saying, you know what, I don't have $80,000, because a lot of us don't have $80,000 just sitting around. I was like, you know what, I can't buy it. I was just going to put it off. But God had a plan, and he had a purpose, and he knew that he was going to take us through 2020 with coffee. And we didn't run out. We had coffee then. I just got a new container in 2021 here. So God does amazing things. He takes care of us even sometimes when we don't understand why. So that's kind of the story of the coffee. This is what it comes like in a shipping container. It's loaded right to the brim, and I get guys, we all unload it, put it on pallets. It's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy stuff. So who buys the coffee? Well, what we do is we have quite a few businesses that purchase our coffee, businesses, churches like yourself. We have retail stores that have started carrying the coffee. We have an online store. We ship it all over the country. In fact, I had, this is really funny, I had a missionary go back to Nicaragua, and he ordered up coffee, and I ended up shipping down to Nicaragua. So just the irony of it, bring coffee up, ship it back down. But God does just amazing things with it. And so the coffee, where we started actually making enough money that I pay about 10% over the going rate to these farmers just to help them out. I pay for all their taxes, so if they have taxes incurred in country, I pay for those. And then we also started working with a school down there called the Rio Christian Academy. It has about 285 kids. We build the library for them. I built a fence around their school. We've really poured into this school with the funds from the coffee. We also remember Ben, the guy I met on the back of the truck. He does Bible translation. I help fund his Bible translation now through the coffee. So Better Life Coffee is funding Bible translation. He's been doing that now for going on 17 years. So it's really incredible just seeing where God has taken this and just the different things he does with it. There's also a Dream Center down there, which does a feeding program. They feed about 5,000 kids a month. We help with the feeding program there down in Nicaragua as well. We work with some local people, Cross Cafe, which is a little cafe down in Strasbourg. If you've ever been down there, that's our coffee. And they have kind of an after-school ministry that works with kids in Strasbourg, helping them after school. We've also worked with Towards the Goal Ministries. Bruce Hampshire started that, and he has a program where he's involved in schools. Basically, what our dream is with Better Life Coffee is any way it's related to kids, that's how we want to help. Any way it's related to kids, that's our goal. Our motto is helping kids one cup at a time. And so sometimes God just wants you to start. You're looking at this, and you're like, oh, that's, how do I'm not going to get involved in coffee. But God sometimes just wants you to start. He wants you to just take the first step. And I seen this quote one time. Whoops, I'm sorry. It says, if you don't have to pray to accomplish your dreams, you might not be dreaming big enough. And I think that's where I was at a lot of times. I was thinking everything that was manageable, things that I could control, things that I could, I didn't know anything about coffee. I still have a lot to learn about coffee. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what good coffee tasted like, what bad coffee. I didn't know anything like that. But God, I believe, took that because he wants to get the glory from it. I can't sit here and say, well, it's all because of me, because that's the farthest thing from the truth. I think it was in spite of me, to be honest with you. So sometimes I think we just have to start. I get this question a lot, like, well, where do I start? What am I going to do? And Matthew 10:42 actually gives us this really simple question here, or just a simple answer. It says, and if you give even a cup of cold water to one of the least of my followers, you will surely be awarded. How many of you can give a cup of water to someone? I see a hand raise here. I think all of us can. That's something that doesn't take much. Maybe it's a cup of coffee that you can have for someone. Maybe it's just stopping and listening to someone, just spending some time with them. Your past, things that you've done in your past, things that have happened in your past is actually preparing you for your future. Did you know that? Things that have accumulated in your past actually prepare you for your future. Because David didn't start out killing giants, right? He killed lions and bears before he graduated to lions. So he had some practice. He had some target practice first before he got to lions. There's a story of the Good Samaritan. And we look at that story and we think, well, it was a no-brainer for the Good Samaritan to go just and help someone. Why wouldn't he? Why did the priest and the Levite walk along on the other side of the road? Why didn't those people help? And I think the reason they didn't help is they started asking themselves some questions. When they walked up to him, they thought, if I help this guy, what could happen to me? Maybe I could get robbed. Maybe something could happen to me. I could be the next person lying beside the road. And the question that they should have been asking is, instead of what could happen to me, what will happen to him if I don't help him? And I think that's the question we have to start asking ourselves. If we see needs in the world, if we see things in society that we can fix or change, we don't ask, what's going to happen to me if I jump out and help? It's like, what is going to happen to that person if I don't? And I think that's what happens, like when I heard that story of that little girl that disappeared. To this day, I've talked to that farmer. He's never seen his daughter again. you know. And I don't know if that would have, the cycle, I kind of asked him, I was like, well, it didn't make sense for me as a parent. How can you do that? But he had 8 other children. And he said, you know, it was either we all starve or, you know, he was faced with consequences that I've never been faced with before. And so you have to ask yourself the question, what will happen to them if I don't help? And we can all help. We can start with a cup of cold water. So how can you get involved? It talks about that the harvest is great, the workers are few. It says, then Jesus said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Pray and ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his vineyard. The first thing you can do is pray. I can always use more prayers. And I actually really welcome them because God is doing a really awesome thing, but the devil always wants to take it down. You know, whenever he sees something good going, he's like, yeah, I hate that. I want to take it down. And so just please pray for us. The other thing you can do is buy coffee. And maybe you don't drink coffee. I had a lady come up to me, she's like, oh, I hate coffee, and she's giving me this big spiel. But she goes, I buy it for Christmas presents for all my friends. I was like, sweet, you know, that's good. I like it. I wasn't sure where she's going when she started out, I hate coffee, but it ended well. So you can do that. You can buy coffee. I had a friend that came up to me and he said, I've had this really big passion to roast coffee. And what I want to do, the idea that I have is I'm going to put the gospel on the bag of each one of those coffees. I'm going to hand them out to people. And so he started buying some coffee, bought himself a tiny little roaster, and he's roasting coffee right now, and he's printing the gospel on these bags, and he's handing them out as a witnessing tool. I'm like, that's awesome. That's great. God can do anything with it. So maybe you have an idea. The other thing we do is we take quite a few mission trips down to Nicaragua. Now, last year we didn't, but I would love it if you guys could come along sometime and just experience it. I've taken teams up to 50 people, and I can guarantee you that when these people come back, when I come back, we have a renewed sense of purpose for what God is doing in the world, for one, and just the purpose the plan that he has for our lives. And people have come up with all different things. So we take mission trips. God can inspire you and call you along the way. The other thing is you can support our school and dream center that is down there. Like we have a school down there, we said, with 285 kids. And so if you're interested, we do child sponsorship. There's kind of remote learning. We've had people go down there and teach down there at the school. So there's a lot of different opportunities you can do. So if you don't have to pray to accomplish your dreams, you might not be dreaming big enough. I want to end with this, Proverbs 16:9. The heart of man plans his way. A lot of times we have these big plans, but ultimately God establishes our steps. So if the praise and worship team wants to come up, and I'm not sure where you're at in your spiritual journey. Maybe you listen to this, in a church this size, not everybody maybe is a Christian. I don't know. But I'm going to reckon there's maybe some people that, like me, they were kind of hooked on the American dream. And I'm not saying, you can have a nice house, you can have cars, you can have your kids. That's all good and well. But maybe God wants something more from you. Maybe he wants to take you to another step. Maybe he has a plan for you and you're not living that out right now. So I would really encourage you, pray this prayer. And I'm going to pray this right now. So I want you to close your eyes and we're going to pray. Dear God, maybe there's someone here that has felt a calling on their heart and they weren't sure exactly what it is. Maybe it's a call to serve in ministry. Maybe it's a call to serve in church. Maybe it's a call to go into missions. Dear God, maybe it's a call that they've been reminded just to go and just meet for coffee with someone, just to talk. Keep pushing that. Keep having your prompting. Keep having your Holy Spirit just keep that in the forefront. Because God, you know what? The harvest is big. And we are your hands and feet. We're the only people that you have down here, dear God. And without us, you're going to accomplish your path, but dear God, it's going to be easier sometimes going through us. And we just thank you so much for your son, Jesus. We thank you for the gift that he gave us. We owe everything to him. And if there's someone here, dear God, that has not made the commitment to Christ, who has not accepted him as Lord and Savior, who has not put their faith and trust in him, dear God, I wish that they would talk to someone and just put their faith in you, dear God. We thank you for everything that you do for us. We give you all the glory. We give you all the glory and honor for the story of Better Life Coffee because you're the reason we do it. We ask this all in your name. Amen. Thank you, guys.